introduction to genetics and monohybrid crosses. So, genetics is the science or scientific study of heredity and variation in living organisms. And this term, heredity, is simply the process in which parents passes certain genes onto their children. So under genetics, we have a scientist who is regarded as the father of genetics, and his name is Gregor Mendel. So he's the one who discovered how genes are passed from parents to their offsprings. He is the first scientist to be credited with giving proper explanation regarding the way in which characteristics or traits are inherited. And he did this by using what we call garden peas in his experiments on to formulate laws which explained the manner of inheritance of characters. So a garden pea is this flower in this picture here. So he used this plant in his experiments to come up with laws which explains the manner of inheritance of characters. So how did he do that? So Mendel chose what we call pure breeding pea plants to study the inheritance of several characteristics. So a pure breeding plant is obtained after many generations of several pollination. So he crossed a lot of he got one of the plants and he self-pollinated it for several generations and came up with what we call a pure breeding plant. And a pure breeding plant is a plant which will always produce the same kind of plants when self-pollinated. So these pure breeding plants, they produce identical offsprings and show the same traits as their parents. So those are what we call pure breeding plants. So in one of his experiments, Mendel chose two parent plants, one a pure breeding tall plant and the other a pure breeding short plant. Then from there, he called this generation the parental generation, or in other words, we can call it P generation. So he carried out a cross pollination. So a cross pollination is simply a pollination in which a pollen grain is transferred to a stigma of another plant. That is, what he did is he transferred the pollen grains from a tall plant onto the stigma of the short plant. The pollen grain, these are male sex cells which he transferred to the female part of a plant, which is the stigma. So that's how he conducted his cross. And then from there he collected the seed and planted them and found that all grew to become tall plants. So the results of parent cross appeared in the first generation. He called them to be filial generation or F1 generation. So these were the first plants he got after crossing the parental plants, and he called them filial generation, or in other words, F1 generation. Then from there, Mendel allowed the F1 generation to self-pollinate. He got the F1 generation and he self-pollinated them to produce the second filial generation, or the F2 generation. And he discovered that when he planted the seeds from the F2 generation, about 3/4 of the offsprings were tall and 1/4 was short. So he found that the ratio of tall to short was 3:1. So Mendel found similar results when he crossed pure breeding pure plants for each of other characters. So a pea plant has a lot of characteristics. It has a lot of traits. One of the traits can be tall and can be flower color, and we can also talk of the shape of the seed. So those are some of the traits a pea has. It has a lot of traits and characteristics. So he tried in his experiment all these kinds of characteristics, and what he found is that the ratio of the second generation was 3:1. So this type of cross, where a single trait of characteristics is contrasted, is what we call a monohybrid cross. So a monohybrid cross is nothing but a cross in which one trait, let's say we are considering color, which is, let's say, red and black. So this is a single trait, which is color of the flower. So he considered one trait at a time. So when you consider one trait at a time, or a single trait is passed on from one generation to another, then we can call that kind of cross a monohybrid cross. So when drawing these monohybrid crosses, a single letter, the first letter of the dominant character, is used as a symbol for the gene. Let's say we want to know how the gene for tau is transferred from the parents to the offspring. Like, for example, in the experiment of Mendel, he crossed a short plant to a tall plant. So a short plant has the alleles of small letter t, and the tall plant has the alleles of capital letter T. So we use the same letters because the international agreement, they agreed that the letters of the dominant character should be used when drawing monohybrid crosses. So for tau, you represent it with the lowercase, and for short, you represent it as small letter or lowercase t, and for tau you represent it with capital letter T. And remember, the alleles are in pairs. Because one allele is inherited from the paternal and the other allele is inherited from the maternal, so they add up to 2. So he crossed a tall plant, which is homozygous. When we say homozygous, that is the same alleles are similar. And he crossed another homozygous recessive allele, and what he got is that all the resulting offsprings were tall. They were tall. None of the offsprings was short. And then after that, he crossed these F1 offsprings. Then after crossing these offsprings, he found that one out of the 3 was short. So he crossed the F1 generation and he found that 3 of the offsprings were tall and 1 of them was short. But at first, when he crossed these 2 pure breeding plants, the short and the tall one, all the resulting offsprings were tall. But after crossing these ones, he found that 1 of them was short and the other 3 were tall. That is, these 2 F1 generation were carrying a recessive allele for a short plant. So we can illustrate that in a monohybrid cross. So we are going to talk about that in my next video. We are going to discuss about more details about monohybrid cross and how you can answer some questions on monohybrid crosses. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave your comment in the comment section concerning this video.